right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our latest edition of Webinar Wednesdays. Today we have Shanthi. She's the co-founder and CEO of Casap, and she's going to show you how AI can help your credit union reduce the amount of fraud that credit unions generally have to write off. Um, I'm not going to steal any more of your thunder. I'm going to let you take it away. Shanthi, welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen real quick and we'll get started. Hope everyone is doing well today. We have a great group here. Just feel free to chime in and ask any questions throughout. I love having conversations, but excited to share some of our learnings with everyone. And I hope you'll be able to walk away with some things that you can take to your credit union. So rethinking disputes with AI. We're going to talk about what are disputes really? Like what's going on with them? Why are we getting so many more than we used to get? Why is it so painful for everyone involved? And what's the cost of that truly, right? The fraud losses, the member pain, the cost of just processing it if you're not doing everything in-house. So what's the true cost of disputes and how can we actually kind of turn it into an opportunity to build lasting loyalty with a member and in the process of that reduce losses. So we've got a lot to cover. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be information packed. And like I said, please feel free to interrupt along the way. But just first, a little bit about me. So I am the CEO and co-founder of Casap. Casap actually stands for Get Your Case Done ASAP. I don't know if you knew that, Dean. But the concept here is when it comes to payments, if money goes from point A to point B, it's exactly where people wanted it to go. It doesn't really make a difference on if it's with one institution or another. The way we really differentiate ourselves is in our service. What do we do? How do we operate when something goes wrong? What happens when money goes from point A to point B and they didn't want it to go there? Or the money went there, they were fine with the money going there, but the merchant didn't hold up their end of the bargain and they're freaking out. How do we show up in those moments? And I had to think a lot about that at Robinhood, where I was for 6 years. My co-founder was at Chime. We had to think about how do we scale amazing high quality support and service for 45 million members. So at that scale, we had to think about, well, how can we figure out by asking the best questions up front who's telling the truth and who isn't? And how can we enable those like instant resolutions that members are coming to expect, right? If they order a pizza at Domino's, they know exactly when there's pepperonis on their pizza. So why wouldn't they expect the same level of transparency and updates with their disputes with their money? So those are the kind of platforms that we build at Robinhood and Chime. And that's kind of what really inspired KSAP into existence. And specifically, just kind of diving into one story. When I say Robinhood, usually there's someone in the audience that thinks, oh, yeah, wasn't there a Netflix movie made about them? Like, wasn't there that whole like GameStop fiasco that led to everyone being mad? That situation is exactly what inspired me to think about what every financial institution, I believe, thinks about, which is trust. How do you build trust scalably with members? And how do you build trust that lasts for life so that you don't get into these situations? And even if you happen to get into this situation, you come out of it as a trusted entity that really rose above some of the fears that everyone has when they're choosing a financial institution. So, in terms of today's agenda, I want to talk about disputes in terms of three questions. Why are disputes rising? What is first party fraud? Why is it growing so fast? And why does it feel like such a struggle to help the members that have legitimate disputes get their money quickly, while also making sure that we're not giving away free money to people that are just pretending to have not bought something that they maybe bought? And then the second part is going to be a lot about how does getting disputes right help? And how can you actually take some of these learnings back to your credit union as you think about a framework you can use to actually think about disputes? Um, so let's start with why are disputes rising? Well, I like to tell stories. So let's meet Timmy. Timmy tells the truth, truth telling Timmy. That'll help you remember that. So Timmy maybe is looking at his statement on a Sunday evening and he sees a $2,000 charge at Best Buy. He's like, what? 2,000 bucks? I can barely make rent at the end of the month. What? I definitely didn't buy a TV at Best Buy. Like, did someone else on my account buy it? No, no one else. But what's going on? I'm freaking out, right? So Sunday evening, sees this, he's freaking out, and he wants to be able to talk to his credit union. Maybe he has to wait till the branch is open. Maybe there's a 24/7 call center, but general, he's filing a dispute and he's saying, I'm freaking out. I did not do this. The issue, though, is for every Timmy that has rent due at the end of the month that the disputes policy was really made for, there are 5 Freds. So Fred is a fraudulent Fred. Fred intentionally abuses the dispute system. So Fred is going to buy the TV and then intentionally pretend he didn't because he heard from a friend or a YouTube video or a TikTok that if he did that, he could get money back. And who wouldn't want free money? And to make matters worse, for every Fred, there are 2 more Franks. So Frank is unintentionally abusing the dispute system. So what Frank is doing is maybe Frank, this is actually a real case. So there was a member that went to Disneyland, and after this trip, he filed a dispute with 3 transactions. So on this trip to Disneyland, he had a premium economy seat, but the legroom was really tight, and he felt he got gypped. He was like, this isn't premium economy. Then the Airbnb he was at, it was advertised as a heated pool, but when he stepped into the pool, it was kind of lukewarm. It was a little tepid. So he was like, oh, that doesn't, they didn't meet up their end of the bargain. And then finally his family goes to this dinner, gets a bunch of burgers at this diner, and all the burgers were really dry. So he doesn't talk to the airline, he doesn't talk to Airbnb, he doesn't talk to the diner. He just comes back from this trip and he says, I'm going to file a dispute. My credit union will handle it. Right. So we've got Timmy, who's a really intense problem, really sensitive, time sensitive problem. He like really needs his money back. He needs protection, he needs to be able to make rent. But then we've also got all these Freds that are lying about it, pretending to be a Timmy. Then we've got all these Franks that are using their credit union like a universal refund center. So, if Debbie, who works at ABC Credit Union, handles disputes, she wants to help Timmy. She really does. We all want to help Timmy, but he's so hard to find. And at scale, the problem just gets worse. So the question is, how do the Debbies of the world find the Timmies who tell the truth, prioritize them, help them, while making sure Fred and Frank don't get free money? This is the problem around disputes. This is what's going on. And here's what makes matters worse. There's a lot of rising awareness around disputes. TikTok, Reddit, YouTube. And at the end of the day, there's always going to be people that are looking for ways to take advantage of the financial system. So the dispute, the idea that you can file a dispute and there's a regulatory requirement for your credit union to process your case so that they have to make a decision in 10 business days. And if they can't find really good grounds to deny your claim, they have to give you provisional credit. It almost operates like a revolving credit card. Like it's definitely something that a lot of people are taking advantage of. And on top of that, there's one more thing that's making first party fraud grow disproportionately, which is our tools and how overwhelmed our system is. So we've got our Debbies and we've got our Timmies and our Freds and our Franks, and we've got so many Freds and Franks that at the end of the day, because of so I think the way to think about this is because the volume is so high, the way we're addressing the overwhelmed system today is it lends itself to being abused. So let's actually talk about that. So credit unions today, they have write-off thresholds, right? So everyone on this call, if you're at a credit union, you probably have some threshold. Anything under X, anything under $10, $20, $50. One of our clients, a relatively large credit union, their write-off threshold was $1,500. Anything less than 1,500, no one would look at, they would just give credit and move on. It didn't start there, but it got there. All right. So we got write-off thresholds. We also outsource an aspect of this process to our processors, right? So once someone comes in and they say, I didn't do this, we give them a credit, then we manually go and file a chargeback for our processor. But our processor doesn't have context. Who's the member? What's their history? Do they file a lot of disputes? Have we won a lot of those disputes? They say they've never bought a TV at Best Buy. They're buying TVs at Best Buy all the time. So there's all this context that they're missing. But then the biggest thing is they don't necessarily have skin in the game, right? So our processors are They can be great partners when it comes to processing payments. None of us want to do that ourselves. But when it comes to making risk-based decisions to decide, okay, we are going to work as hard as we can to get Timmy back his money within a few days. And we're going to work as hard as we can to make sure we're not giving free money to Fred and Frank. There's no skin in the game to really do that well, consistently. Um, they just get paid per chargeback, and that's fine. But there are better ways to do that. And then finally, on top of having these thresholds where you say teams are only working on things above a threshold, and the team does not need to do anything with chargebacks, or processors can do it, even though they might be losing chargebacks and we don't think they should be. We're also going to need to hire more people on our team just to manage the load. And if we can hire them, that's painful. That's really painful because everyone on the team is trying to stay above water to just make sure we're meeting regulatory guidelines, right? We don't even get time to investigate and figure out who are the Timmies and who are the Freds and who are the Franks. We're just issuing credit, filing chargebacks, sending letters, and doing the manual tasks. Any thoughts or questions on this before I continue? Does this resonate with what's happening at your credit union today? I like pausing for questions sometimes, even if no one answers. I can sit in silence. It absolutely resonates. Thank you, Colleen. It's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah. And fortunately or unfortunately, I'd say 99% of the credit unions I talk to, I usually see a lot of nodding at this point, right? Because they're like, yeah, that's exactly what the pain is. But I thought this is the way we had to do it, right? This is the accepted cost of doing business. And it doesn't need to be. And AI changes that. Us actually taking a look and questioning the status quo changes that. So there's definitely opportunities to change this. And um, one sec, there we go. So just to make sure I'm like really honing this message, part of how we operate disputes is making first party fraud worse, right? So because a lot of people are filing disputes and Debbie's getting overwhelmed, we increase our write-off threshold. Maybe it goes from $25 to $35, then $50, then $80. And because we make it easier to get free money, more people are filing disputes. So this is that first party fraud feedback loop. Again, it's not all of our problems. If people could just be nice and only tell the truth, a lot of problems in this world would be solved, including disputes, though disputes would be the smallest of them. But because people are people, and where there are opportunities to make money, they'll want it. The real problem is like write-off thresholds are not a sustainable solution to managing this volume. And at the end of the day, still makes people very frustrated because they don't know what's going on, especially with larger disputes. So we've talked about this. It's hard for Debbie to find Timmy and Nassie of Fred and Frank's. So now the question is, how can we use technology, right? The latest in technology, AI, but also technology that has existed for a decade, to actually apply that to this problem to figure out who is a Timmy, who is a Fred, and who is a Frank. So I want you to imagine a world where you have one platform. In this case, this is the platform that we've created, where we are connected to the core banking in real time, and we're connected to the card networks in real time. So when Timmy comes in and he answers the questions the best dispute investigator would ask up front, whether it's in his online banking or at a branch or in a call center 24/7, and he's answering a question like, Timmy, did you have your card on you when this TV was bought at Best Buy? And he says yes. And we can immediately go to Visa or MasterCard and be like, hey, was this a card present transaction or not? And they're like, oh, it wasn't a card present transaction. We're like, oh, that checks out. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense, Timmy. And as he's answering more questions, like, why are we even out? Like, yeah, have you transacted with Best Buy before? We can look at that. We could look at core banking, look at his transaction history and see, Timmy, you haven't actually ever transacted with this Best Buy. And also, you live here and this Best Buy is over. Okay, all right. All of this is really checking out. So we can look at all of this information in real time to automatically validate his story. And then, because we're connected to the core and we're also connected to communication systems like email and the online banking, we can automatically issue that provisional credit the moment he creates that case. Because we say, oh, we really think Timmy's telling the truth. Let's send him that money. so he can make rent, right? Let's also send him the email that we have to. Like we have to send him communication by Reg E, but let's send him a great email that tells him exactly what's going on. He got his credit and link him to a status tracker that always shows him what's going on with this case, the same way Domino's tells him what toppings are getting on his pizza. Right. So that's the world we're able to power with the simple thing. Maybe, I say it's simple, it's not that simple, is connecting all the right systems in one place and powering it with this intelligence to figure out how would the best fraud investigator operate here? What questions would we ask? What data would we look at? What actions could we take immediately? Um, so I want to dive into this because I love my sessions being educational. So I want to walk through how we can use data to properly evaluate risk. So KSAP leverages quite a few data signals, and we leverage AI to figure out who's telling the truth and who's not, and where we have chargeback rights. And if we have chargeback rights and we can file a really good case, we file winning cases, right? So KSAP will automatically file a chargeback with the merchant on the network. And once the merchant responds with some document, maybe Best Buy says, here are all the reasons why we don't want to give James money back, even though this wasn't him and it was on us to make sure it was him. Um, they're going to come back with a document that's like 5 pages long or 15 pages long. Our AI, that's what ChatGPT is great at. Our generative AI can summarize that, figure out, okay, the merchant's saying this, Timmy's saying this, the networks are saying this, the core saying this. What is the best way to handle this? And let's automatically generate that response to the merchant to say, tough luck, Best Buy. You said X, like, you said this was signed by someone named Kason, but it was actually James. Like, you said this was delivered then, but it actually wasn't delivered. And look at this. Like, here's the proof. And it would automatically generate that response, respond to the merchant, and actually win a case that might not be won today. So that's what we're able to power. I actually want to walk us through some very important aspects of data that our AI uses to make these decisions so that even tomorrow you can take this insight back to the team and say, hey, maybe from now on, when we look at disputes, maybe we look at some of these pieces of data and maybe we can make even better decisions, or encourage our processor to make better decisions than they're making today. So let's dive in. So we talked about this, the disputes data. So when I say dispute data, that could be the transaction, information about the member, information about the merchant. This lives in all sorts of places, and we're integrated with all the logos that you see here. But the idea here is this data needs to paint a very clear picture for Debbie, so she knows who's a Timmy and who's a Frank and who's a Fred. So there are three types of data I want you to think about. There's member data, right? Who is Timmy? What is his story? Is he a new user or a new member or not? Does he have a lot of accounts? How much money? How does he tend to transact? Does he tend to buy things at 2 in the morning? Questions like that. Then there's the transaction, right? What do we know about this transaction? What's the entry mode of this transaction? Um, and how is this a recurring trend? Is this a subscription? Is this not? Things like that. And then the network. And from the network, we can understand a lot about merchants, right? So what kind of merchant is this? Do they have a high fraud score? Yeah, we can understand if Timmy transacts with this type of merchant, but maybe this is a merchant pretending to be something they're not. And I'm sharing some vague questions. So let's actually dive into some details. So for Timmy, how long has this person been a member? Okay, maybe he's been a member for a little while. Maybe he's a new account. And sometimes fraudsters, Freds look a lot like new accounts that are just trying to dispute and move on. What's their dispute history? That's not just how many disputes they filed, but how many of them have we won? And maybe if we've lost them, have we had to write them off? And if so, how much has Timmy cost us so far? How much has a Fred cost us so far? $2,000, $1,000, $5,000? It's good to know. And then does their story about what happened match what we're seeing? So there's a narrative, right? Timmy or Fred is coming in saying, I didn't do this. This is what happened. My dog ate my homework. My cat swallowed my card. There's going to be different stories that we hear. Does it match up with what we're seeing? Any thoughts or questions so far? Let's keep going. Otherwise, all right. So here's an example of what this could look like. So let's say we look at how long this member has been with the credit union, 4.3 years. Okay, that's not a new account. That checks out. What's their dispute history? Well, in these 4 years, or sorry, in this last month, so L12 means last 12 months. In this last year, they have filed 5 disputes, and we've only won one of them. Hmm, okay. And like another follow-up question there could also be, well, how much money have we lost in that? That's kind of a yellow flag. And then does their story about what happened match with what we're seeing? Sometimes it's unclear, right? Let's say someone comes in and they say, I ordered a couch and the couch never showed up. Okay, well, I don't know. We don't really have proof if the couch showed up or not. Maybe they said there's no tracking number. Maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe they're not. It's unclear. But it's good that we ask to understand, could that have been a yes or could that have been a no? Could there be proof that they're absolutely telling the truth or proof that they're absolutely not? That's an important thing to ask. Transaction data. Does the transaction data match the member's story? Is this a normal transaction for the member? And do we have the evidence we need to actually win? So let's say the transaction data doesn't match the member story. Classic example. We asked the member, did you have your card? And they said, yeah, I had my card on me at the time of this transaction I didn't do. And then we look at the data from the network and we're like, that's a card present transaction. How could their card have been in 2 places at once? Hmm. And then is this a normal transaction for the member? So maybe we look at time of day, 2:05 p.m. Looks like the member tends to transact around that time, but it's $1,000. That's not a normal transaction amount for this member or for this member and merchant code, right? There's certain merchants where you're like, yeah, I'm always going to be spending upwards of $1,000 at furniture places. And, as much as I don't want to, every time I walk into Costco, I spend a lot of money as well. But looking at that history, we can kind of understand, is this a normal transaction or is this a anomalous transaction for the member? And then finally, this last question on the transaction side, a lot of people don't actually ask because it's hard to know. But do we have the evidence we need to win the chargeback? So what that means is Visa and MasterCard, they have rules around where you have chargeback rights and where you don't. And we can talk about this towards the end if anyone's curious, because we can definitely talk about worlds where they tell us we don't have chargeback rights, we have to write it off, but we actually don't need to. And I can talk about some strategies to win there. But overall, there's a question of in the court of law of Visa or MasterCard, when we file a chargeback, what evidence will they actually ask for? Think of it as just our normal court of law. If there's an eyewitness report, that puts someone at the time of this, crime that we're, looking at. Okay, that's very good evidence. But let's say we find out that that eyewitness person was drunk at the time or couldn't see properly. That changes how admissible that evidence is. Well, that's not great. So it's like very similar rules on the chargeback side where you need to have the right evidence to actually win. And if we have a platform like, I mean, Casap, we have the intelligence to actually see upfront the moment Timmy finishes telling us about his dispute or Fred finishes telling us about his dispute, we can tell, do we think they're telling the truth or not by looking at all this data? And do we have the evidence we need to actually do something about it? Can we actually win? And if we don't, it's not writing it off. It's saying, hey, if you give us proof that you did place this order, or proof that you ordered a red sweater and you got a green overall, something like if you show us proof, and this is the exact kind of proof we need, we'll win the case, we'll automatically ask for that information. And then finally, the network data, right? So from a merchant perspective, um, does this merchant typically behave responsibly? There are different scores out there for different merchants. There's different MCC codes that are a bit riskier. One thing we see sometimes is online gambling places. Someone, just gambling online and maybe has a little better's regret because they lost some money. And now they're saying, what online gambling place? That's not me. No, that's not, I need my money back. Right. So it's just like there's certain codes that are a little, or certain categories that are a little riskier than others. And then there's also the question of that specific merchant. Has the network seen a lot of disputes with this merchant? And what kind of evidence would help us win with this merchant? For example, for a very long time, Cash App would have their own write-off threshold. And Cash App would say, oh, if you gave me this kind of evidence, I'll definitely be approving that chargeback. So we can understand that and we can see, oh, Best Buy, as long as we have evidence of X, Y, and Z, we'll be able to actually win any chargeback we file with them. And that kind of intelligence comes over time. And that's how, our platform gets more and more intelligent with every additional client that's using it, with every additional dispute, because we get more and more data to really enrich and make us smarter about how to manage some of these chargebacks. So in this case, let's say maybe the merchant does behave responsibly. We haven't seen a lot of disputes. We know a proof of return would really help, but we don't have it. In this situation, depending on our likelihood to win this case, our win score, as we call it, a Casap, we could maybe automatically ask them, send them an email saying, hey, can you send us a proof of return? It would look something like this. If you send this to us, it's going to increase our likelihood to get you your money back by 80%. Could you upload it, please? And if they don't do it, maybe our win score is still high enough where it's worth filing the chargeback anyways. So at this point, Debbie can have a full picture, right? So given the platform is connected to all these different systems, it's not just important to be connected, it's important to have an opinion on what information we have to look at when to inform our decisions. So we can look at this and see Timmy's never filed a dispute, he's all taken care of. We can look at this and see Fred's filed a ton of disputes, Frank's filed half as much, but still some. And, Fred said he had his card, but this was a card present transaction. That's not checking out. Or Frank's card was never stolen, or Frank has lost 6 of 7 disputes, and Frank has definitely purchased from this merchant before, right? So looking at all of this, it informs that full picture that helps make sure Fred and Frank don't get free money, right? Because otherwise, if we're not doing this, what are we doing? We have a large write-off threshold that's automatically giving them money that incentivizes them to keep filing disputes. Let's say it's a pretty large dispute, it's above our write-off threshold. We don't have all this data in one place. So, and we're a little nervous because we're going to say, oh, Reggie, we have to give a credit. Let's just give them that credit in those 10 business days. We can pull it back later. They might be bye-bye, by the time we're the wiser, 60 or 90 days later, because we then have to file a chargeback manually with our processor who will then manually file it on the network, maybe take some time to do it. And they don't have the context or really the will or the skin in the game to really limit the losses. So they might come back and say, oh, we lost this chargeback. But you might think, okay, this is a Timmy, we need to give him, we have to write that off. Or you might think this is a Fred, but you don't have enough proof. So you're too, at this point, you probably just want to work on the next case because there's so much manual work to do. So that's really what we're seeing and how we're changing some of that. So let me talk a little bit about once we look at all of these pieces of data, what can we actually do with that information? What is the end member experience we can create that does two things, that builds lasting loyalty while also cutting fraud? We just published a case study where one of our credit unions, we cut their fraud in half, 51% across their entire debit card portfolio, just by improving disputes. So let's say Timmy comes in and we look at all that information we just walked through and we see, oh, Timmy has a high win score, 81%. And we see that as soon as he files a dispute in online banking. Great. What can we do? We can give him that Amex experience, that really sleek, all right, Timmy, we've got your back. Here's your provisional credit immediately. And here's an email. And here's the status of your case. Just so you know, we still do have to talk to merchants, etc. But here you go. You can pay rent. You're covered. We've got your back. And in that process, we're also automatically filing a winning chargeback with the network. So Casap's automatically doing that. But let's say Frank comes in. So remember, Frank goes to Disneyland, files that dispute with a bunch of transactions, but doesn't really give us the evidence we need, right? So we tell Frank a few things. We say, Frank, if you're really trying to sort this out, just talk to the airline, talk to Airbnb. And we don't have to say that to everyone, but if Frank is a frequent disputer using you like his concierge, like his assistant of talking to merchants on his behalf, that's not a great use of your time or the credit union's resources. So we say, hey, Frank, it might be faster. It looks like you've transacted with Airbnb or you've gone to this diner multiple times before. Talking to them to figure out your refund would be much faster than trying to go through us, but we're still willing to take the case. Um, but if you want, here's their number, go talk to them. And then also we say, hey, Frank, like based on what you've shared with us right now, it will be hard for us to get you your money back. But for this merchant, we know that if you give us the proof of X or proof of Y, we'll be able to actually do something about this. Or for this type of transaction, if you give us this proof, we can do something about it. We can automatically ask him for that compelling evidence. Or our platform will automatically send that email and say, these are the two things we need for these two transactions. And at that point, once he maybe uploads that information, because he's like, oh, okay, they're helping me help myself, now his win score is higher. Now there's an 88% chance we're going to win a chargeback if we file it with the evidence we have. So we'll automatically file that chargeback. And then, of course, Fred. Can't forget our Freds. Fred has a low win score. Why? Well, because his answers are not matching up with what we can see from the network and in the core in real time, all in one place, right? So he says he didn't make the Cash App transaction, but for every Cash App transaction, we get a phone number from the network, and it's his phone number, right? Or he's disputing a $200 subscription. This happens a lot, early in the year. I've fallen prey to it too, where we, get a subscription for a nice maybe an Instagram ad tells us there's a good weight loss program, or there's a good gym thing that we can sign up for, or a good, I don't know, supplement nutrient routine where they're going to send you smoothies right to your doorstep. And you try it, you sign up for that trial, you put your card information down, maybe they charge $1 to your card just to make sure they can do it. And you put a calendar reminder to cancel it later because you just wanted to try it out and you forget. Maybe you're really busy that day. You look at that and you're like, oh, the subscription hit. It was way more than I wanted to pay. The smoothies were so terrible. I'm just going to file a dispute and just pretend I didn't do this because I really didn't want the subscription to hit. Well, we can look at that and we can say, hey, you're disputing a $200 subscription, but what about the previous dollar charge? And this looks like a pattern that we see often for like people that are abusing disputes for forgotten cancellations. Like, here's some tips on remembering to cancel your subscription. So we can look at things like that and see, oh, that win score is really low. We are going to give Debbie the evidence she needs to one click deny Fred's claim. So in one fell swoop with all of this data, we're able to differentiate the Timmy from the Fred from the Frank and automate the emails, the chargebacks, the credits to really simplify the experience to enable the team to just focus on research and investigating. And even if you didn't want to touch a case, the platform is going to automatically make sure things are compliant. So in general, we've seen, like I mentioned, our credit unions cut their fraud in half. And it's kind of surprising to me that that much of fraud losses comes from first party fraud. It comes from people who are exactly who they say they are. When we say fraud, we often think hacker out in a different country taking over card number. No, like it is literally sometimes the person right next door taking advantage of disputes. So by doing this better, by asking better questions up front and figuring out who's telling the truth and not, and who can win for and actually winning when we're filing those chargebacks, and not necessarily relying on a middle person in that process, we can actually help cut fraud in half. On top of that, we see much happier members because we give, and I didn't go through it here, but happy to share it in follow-up conversations. We enable that sort of, think of it as like the Amazon experience where you can buy a product really quickly or you can return it just as easily, but you do have to answer a few questions. It's the same thing. If someone wants to file a dispute, Timmy sees that Best Buy charge Sunday evening, goes into online banking, files that dispute, immediately gets a tracker, just like that Domino's style pizza tracker to see what's going on. As the platform and as the team is progressing the case, that updates that status tracker. And all the emails Timmy's getting too sends him links to the status tracker as well. So that really full 24/7, 360 experience that members have come to expect of everything, Amazon, pizza. It's not like they take that hat off and say, oh, my credit union can feel different. They expect that here too. Um, so that's the second thing. And then the third thing is because we're enabling credit unions to essentially automate instant resolutions for disputes and file winning chargebacks automatically, the credit union no longer needs to pay someone like a processor $20, $30, $40 per disputed transaction anymore. It's just to hear that they don't have chargeback rights or they've lost a chargeback. So there's definitely immediate cost savings too. So that's just been so exciting. Just taking all of this data to empower the back office team to have that amazing experience for themselves and their members, while also helping provide that like state of the art dispute intelligence that is constantly evolving. Because first party fraud keeps evolving. Fraud always keeps us on our toes. Visa and MasterCard change their rules twice a year. And thankfully the regulations don't change, but it's kind of hard to keep all of that in your mind. And especially if you have someone new to the job that doesn't really know too much about disputes, onboarding them can feel so hard. One thing we saw recently with one of our credit unions, actually the one that cut fraud in half, they had two people managing disputes. They were outsourcing it. They brought it in-house with Casap. They actually had more time on their hands, and one of them actually really wanted to explore a different career in commercial real estate. So she left, and her replacement was able to understand disputes and how to use Casap and operate disputes really well within a day. So we have essentially simplified some of this so that the team can really be empowered to do what they want to do most, which is build great empathetic relationships with members and make risk-based decisions to make sure Timmy doesn't even need to wait 10 business days to get credit. He gets it immediately. And Fred's not getting any money out of us. And he's going to go somewhere else if he wants to do this, if he wants to keep taking advantage of disputes. So kind of in summary, in terms of some of the things I'd love for you to sort of take back as you think about how you can evolve disputes today, are these three types of data that our AI is looking at. Member information, right? Are they new? Dispute history, is their narrative checking out? Transaction information, the details, the evidence, is this a normal transaction? And then network information. What do we know about this merchant at large? Do we see a lot of disputes with this merchant? And what kind of evidence really holds its weight in the court of the network? Um, and the overall takeaway is by looking at all of that data from past interactions with members and merchants and really presenting it and using it to take actions immediately, it not only helps folks identify fraud, it helps them work smarter and it helps them win more chargebacks with help, which helps the credit union and it helps the member. Disputes is not something that everyone wants to think about all the time. I don't think there's a single person, except for me. I'm crazy. I did not go, you kind of heard the origin story. I did not come out of the womb wanting to solve disputes. But our team is obsessed with it so that you don't necessarily have to be, at least not in the very nitty-gritties. And you could really think about the context of that situation, of the member. Who are they? What do they need? What does this mean to them? And how can we empower them to do something better? Sometimes Fred is looking for a little bit of credit. Maybe, he's a little hard up on work and he's taking advantage of disputes, but he's actually a really good guy. Like maybe we should just show him like other ways that he can get access to a little bit of credit just to like weather out the storm this month, right? Like we can have empathy and actually point them in the right direction, but we need to figure out who's a Fred and who's a Timmy and who's a Frank first. Um, and then other takeaways I'd love for you to sort of think about, not just in the context of disputes, but even overall, questioning the status quo. A lot of the credit unions that we talk to, before they talk to us, they usually think, oh, we always have to send chargebacks to the process. There's no other way. Like we have to have write-off thresholds. There's no other way. We have to manually select transactions and we can't do pending transaction disputes and we have to issue credits and we have to do all of that manually. There's no other way. Maybe there is another way, right? There's a way to drive better outcomes for your team and for your members without adding more work to your plate. So that's one big thing, question the status quo. Two is always leveraging data. There's so much data at our disposal. It's just a pain to get access to. Like the number of cases we're managing, it would take 50 minutes sometimes to look at all that data that we're automatically looking at in a second. But by looking at that data and presenting it to you, you can make even better decisions than you might be making today. And then finally, I know we didn't touch on it too much, but I kept mentioning it, the Amazon experience, the Domino's experience, the expectations that members are coming to the credit union with these days, especially in a situation like disputes and fraud. it's a high expectation, but there is a way to lean into self-service. There's a way to lean into, Timmy, what do you need? We're available 24/7. Tell us, we'll ask you all the right questions. We do not need to come back to you. You can ghost us, you can go move on with your life. We have you covered. We've got your back. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to share. And would love to open the floor for questions at this point or thoughts overall.
Please feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat and we can read them off to Shanti. I do have a question while everyone is thinking. Um, so you kind of touched on this that you are connected in with Valera, FIS,
Mhm.
the two big processors. And I know from my experience when I used to manage credit and debit card portfolios, the disputes were always handled through the processor for both debit and credit. But it was really up to the onus was on us in the credit unions to make sure what was happening with those disputes. So sometimes it was not always the easiest way, especially during certain periods when fraud was extremely high. Um,
Mhm.
how, so do they need to get permission from their processor to move the disputes over to Casap, or can they just make that move on their own and just stop sending them disputes?
Great question. So usually there is a conversation with the processor, and we do have clients that have moved their disputes off of Alera, off of FIS, off of Fiserv, and off of Visa, DPS. Those are like the four that come to mind immediately. We might have others. But we have a playbook with those processors. And the only reason why we have to have that conversation is if the credit union's in a situation where the processor is managing the chargeback component, which is usually the case, right?
Right.
There's full service where as soon as a member has a transaction that they want to dispute, sometimes they're talking directly to the processor. That's full service. But even though there's only a few folks using full service, almost everyone is outsourcing their chargebacks to their processor. And because of that, the processor owns that relationship with Visa or MasterCard and they're on the bin. So we need to make sure that KSAP is added to the bin because we're a partner with Visa and MasterCard as well. And usually it requires the processor to do that. And that's why we have playbooks with all of these processors. And it sounds kind of interesting, right? Where it's processors don't, they like doing everything. They don't like giving away their Legos. But one thing we've noticed is that all the processors, their teams were spending so many resources. Sorry, the credit unions teams are spending so many resources babysitting the process, kind of like what you said.
Right.
And they actually realized that all the frustration they had with the processor was very much focused in disputes and chargebacks. And the moment they were able to remove that from the processor and use KSAP, they're so much happier with the processor, and that relationship is way less strained or frayed. So the processor has seen some motivation to say, oh, well, like if they're not happy with how we're doing disputes, at least let them be happy with KSAP. We have a playbook with them. Let's go for it. And it just leads to a better relationship. But yeah, usually it requires a conversation with the processor that will help them navigate.
All right. Thank you very much. We did have a question come through. How did the FI who cut their fraud losses in half begin to implement these strategies for that outcome?
Great question.
Please feel free to.
What's interesting is because KSAP already has all of this data in one place, and we suggest these actions, the credit union merely accepted these recommendations. And they looked at this data and they were like, oh, okay, this actually makes sense. So they didn't actually have to take a very concerted effort to reduce the fraud. They just kind of used KSAP. But I'll give you a great example. So, for example, Cash App transactions. A member will come in and they'll say, I didn't do that. I didn't load money into Cash App. That wasn't me. And before, we just kind of have to take them at their word. That's what the credit union was doing. But as soon as they implemented KSAP, so they brought their disputes. In that case, they were Scimitar, Visa, Valera. That was their stack. They brought their chargebacks off of Valera. As soon as KSAP was able to be on that, make that Visa connection, we're able to show all the details for the transaction. So with Cash App, they were able to see, oh, Shanthi said she didn't do this cash out transaction, but looks like the phone number matches. Or another example is they were having their members sign an affidavit saying, okay, if you're saying you didn't do this transaction, you should sign on the dotted line saying you didn't. We implemented a real-time DocuSign integration. So we're automatically sending a DocuSign to the member signs it. The moment they sign it, we actually get an IP address through DocuSign. So we're able to take that IP address, match that to the IP address we get on the transaction, and say, tough luck, Shanti, your IP address matches the transaction. We're denying this claim. So it's things like that. So denials they weren't able to make before because they didn't have that evidence at their fingertips or at all. Now they have it and they're able to deny claims and not write that off anymore. And then the other aspect is they're able to actually file winning chargebacks. So the chargeback win rate is much higher because we have a much better sense, our platform has a much better sense of where do we have rights and what can we win. So that's like an example of the few different things that we kind of saw with them in terms of cutting fraud loss in half. But I think part of this is yes, Casap helps them do a lot, but also part of it is before their hands were tied. They weren't involved in the chargeback process. The processor was doing it. And like I said, it's very hard to have the context and the skin in the game like your own team. So they actually found themselves, even though they had a team of two and they were stretched thin babysitting the outsource process, once they brought it in-house and had more control and had more efficiency through the platform, they were able to actually have more time to investigate and actually do cool things like this, right? So that's the difference.
How long does it take to stand Casap up?
Best case, 3 months.
Okay.
Worst case, 6 months.
All right.
Yeah.
And that's just trying to get all of the players coordinated, is my guess.
Yeah, so just to like do a very high level overview of the integration, we do the core connection. So we do the core connection in real time, and we've already integrated with Scimitar, Correlation, Fiserv cores, FIS cores. So we have pretty good coverage. But just making sure we submit the request for the connection and do that process. That can sometimes take a little while just with the cores, as we know, usually like 2 to 4 weeks. And then the other aspect is usually a 90-day playbook, which we also start at the very beginning with the processor, just to say, hey, we're going to be doing chargebacks ourselves. Can you please initiate the KSAP playbook and then putting KSAP on the bin? And then the third thing, and this is actually extremely easy, is the email communication. That's like 20 minutes of work for the IT team, but
Okay.
the email integration to make sure communication goes out. And that could take like the whole thing that I just described could take 3 to 6 months with certain like validation of business logic along the way. But we call ourselves a partner based on outcomes, not just implementation. So we'll ask you, all right, this is what your disputes look like today. This is what your win rate looks like, your costs, et cetera. This is what success looks like for the partnership. Win rate above 80%, your costs 60% less. Like we like to actually say the ROI here is like the first day you start using CaseApp because you're not paying anyone to do your chargebacks anymore. So that kind of thing. And it usually takes like 3 to 6 months to see like that level of impact. So
Right.
that's why I say 3 to 6 months.
Okay. And how scalable is KSAP? So obviously you are probably very comfortable working with some of the larger credit unions who may or may not have a staff to help with their disputes. So how scalable are you for these smaller credit unions?
Great question. So the smallest credit union we've worked with so far is 200 million in asset size.
Okay.
Um, but we're very excited to work with smaller. We know 77% of credit unions are less than 250 million, and we want to focus on scaling that out. And a few things along those lines. One, especially if it's a core that I just mentioned. We can make those we have those playbooks. We can make those integrations pretty quickly. And one of the things we've been considering is taking a group of credit unions that are on a similar stack and kind of doing it in kind of like one go. So we have those conversations together. And the good news is, as special as we are as people and as credit unions, disputes is very similar. So there isn't that much customization we really need. But just kind of like doing group implementations together, I think could go a long way in helping us scale even faster. Another aspect too is we've been very fortunate to have investors see the vision we have with Casap, not just for disputes, but even for fraud and ACH processing and all of that. So we're actually closing even more funding, which means that we can hire ahead of where we necessarily have customers. So what that means is we're planning on hiring a larger team so that we can actually bring 20 plus credit unions live at once, whereas we probably can't do more than 3 to 5 right now live at once. So part of that is also scaling the company too.
Okay. No other questions have come in. I wanted to thank you, Shanti, for agreeing to do this, sharing all this wonderful information. It sounds like you have an amazing product. If anyone needs to or wants to get in touch with Shanti and you did not get her contact information, please reach out to myself and I will put you in touch with Shanti. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye.